Well, if you're watching this video, it's because you are wanting to know more about hands-based discipleship, especially as it pertains to right speaking. So remember we mentioned that hands-based discipleship is about right doing, which involves both right speaking and right acting. And again, you probably haven't memorized. I even have it tattooed somewhere. Just kidding. Or am I? But it's head, heart, hands. Now, heads based is right thinking. So learning new things, trying new things, expanding your mind and using your mind to get to know God and love Him more that way, which brings me to heart-based discipleship, which is right feeling. So using your heart to bond with God. And right doing, as I just said, is hands. And you need all three of them to work together to pick up the cross and follow Christ. Now, again, today is about right speaking. Last week I did right doing a bit. And right speaking has to do with, well, right speaking, walking the walk and talking the talk. Now, sometimes people keep this to just, I'm not going to use curse words. Or I'm going to talk about things that are good and beautiful and holy. Okay. I would push that a bit though. First of all, right speaking, I would urge you to consider it as a way of bringing goodness into a hurting world. I cannot remember where this study is, but there was a study done that demonstrated that people, every time we hear one negative, nasty thing, we need 7 to 10 nice things said to undo it. So the world needs us in our right speaking to speak lovingly and gently to bring those to Christ who don't know Him, who don't know His acceptance and love and new life. And the world needs us also to stand up and speak truth to power. So that's what I'm focusing on today. Those good things that we need to talk about. So first of all, I think that sometimes we underestimate our ability to spread the good news about Jesus, the new life that we have in Christ. So if you have accepted Christ, you have already heard, and you've already heard in such a way that it convinced you. And therefore you already have an advantage because you're here. So that's first of all. I would encourage you to think about your own testimony. That's a powerful tool. Like, number one, automatically you come into a new life in Christ, and what do you have? You have Christ, you got a testimony, you got a church. What else do you really need to spread the gospel? So I say that to say, I think sometimes, not everyone, but sometimes some people come to, okay, how do I share the gospel? And it's really a lack of confidence, more so than a lack of information. Because truthfully, you can Google what I'm about to say. Some places aren't that great, but you could Google what I'm about to say. You really could. But confidence is another thing. And that's where I think the mind can come in and help. And so can the heart, because part of what helps us in doing the right thing is knowing what it is and being motivated to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, imagine doing it. Maybe daydream about sharing the gospel with someone that you know or love, or a stranger on the bus. Now that might sound too American, and I've heard that before. But daydream about it. What would you say? How would you say it? And even daydream about how you follow up after that conversation goes well, or even if it doesn't go well. How do you follow up, and how do you cope with however well it goes or doesn't go? So all that is to say, when it comes to proclaiming the truth about Christ and his love for the world, and how that love is an invitation to friendship with God. I mean, who doesn't want God as a friend, right? You already have the tools in front of you through your imagination. Try to be gentle and generous in your imagination. Don't let it become too arrogant. Make sure it's others serving. But you also have it in your testimony. So I will say that. But here's the thing. I've said this before in several other contexts, but I'll say it again. There is this big life movement throughout the world, and Peter Dunn, lovely man, we've sat and talked about this before. They go into parts of the world that legitimately haven't heard about Jesus and say, have you heard about Jesus? And people legitimately don't even know what that name means. Is it a person? Is it a thing? Like, what is this Jesus? When we come to the UK, though, we have a bit of a difference because people do sort of know who Jesus is. I mean, we're in a Christian culture and there's Christian education. So I think part of what we have to own and start thinking imaginatively about and compassionately about is that there's misinformation. You have to almost uneducate to educate. And there's a lot of ignorant things that are out there. So I'll say this. I looked up on BBC salvation. And one of the top things that came up was salvation as law on the BBC's website. So I'm really worried about what's being taught in school about what Christianity is. So bear with me. I'm going to read through just a couple sentences, the opening sentences on this page. I don't know who wrote this, but anyway, it says Christians have various beliefs about how to achieve salvation. Do we though? For some, the most important way to achieve salvation is through doing good works, such as giving to charity. Pause. No one thinks that. That is a stereotype. Catholics don't think this. They really don't. And if you think you do, Google Catholicism. In fact, you should be Googling a lot of things instead of looking at this page. But anyway, sorry. However, other Christians focus on worship and faith. Most Christians believe that people can achieve salvation by following God's law, which is found in the Bible. Through these laws, Christians believe that God has helped them to identify sin. To go against these laws is to sin. Now, spoiler alert, I have a master's in this. And I would say 5 sentences. I agree with 20% of what was said. And I just highlight that. And of course, this is salvation as law, so they're going to try to talk about law, pneumos in Greek, so on and so forth. Torah. This is what people think. So already we have to go against this. Also, one of the things that we have to be prepared for is an atheistic, agnostic world. And some of this, to speak this truth, you need to have head knowledge to know what the arguments are and how to engage them. But you need the heart to do it respectfully and gently and lovingly. Because if an atheist is debating with you and you get really angry, might not help. Unless, of course, they've said something that's truly offensive and they're being inappropriate and abusive. But make sure they're being inappropriate and abusive and not just that your feelings are hurt. Anyway, there is this idea that floats around that there is no such thing as God. And they try to use philosophy to defend this. Now, spoiler alert, I'm married to a philosopher. So I think it's Bernard Russell that they point to as evidence of this, because he was a theist that became atheist through philosophy. But there are philosophers who went the other way, who went from atheism to theism through philosophy. Clive Bernard has mentioned that, he was an atheist but encountered God. And so it's not irrational to have belief. And if you want to know more about that, I'm sure Ryan Byerly would be really happy to talk to you about that, or you could buy his books, please, because, you know, maybe he'll be able to take me on a date. Not really, because COVID. But anyway, you get my point. There's books you can read about this. Here's a simple argument, though. All right. One of the things that people say is there cannot be a God because, you know, I can't see it, I can't measure it. Okay, I hear that, and that's a very empirical approach, yet there's a lot of human and natural phenomena that we can't see or measure either. Beauty and appreciating it, for example. Does that mean beauty and other things don't exist? No. And you can try to quantify it in other ways, sure, but same thing. Okay, well, what are you trying to measure and how are you trying to measure it? Which is a basic question that any researcher knows. You have to say what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. So, okay, go on. Tell me why you don't believe. Another thing is people say, look, how can there be evil in the world and a God? Free will, pure and simple. I love my children, and it's just another little side note. Becoming a parent has really helped me understand a bit more metaphorically creation and human behavior, and, you know, I am responsible in the adult, and yet my children can totally win somehow. Don't tell them I said that. But I'm sure it's the same with God. God is not making us into robots. And in the same way that I can only yell at my children, of course I say it nicely first and then I yell, please be nice to one another. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have kids, you realize there's only so much you're in control of. So in short answer, free will, and if you don't understand that, parent analogy is great. In fact, Hebrew Bible has some great understandings of God as parent. And if you look at the Old Testament and think, wow, he's a really wrathful God. Okay, well, have you seen a mom like lose it with her kids after she's told them 20 times not to do something? Yeah, that's also what's happening there. So that's one argument. So we've gone through, there is no God, can't measure it. We've gone through God's too angry, or God, how there can be a God when there's suffering in the world. Human. So yeah, so one thing is free will. And another thing is he's just as upset about it as you are. So lean into that and you'll find him. But the last thing is, I would say, is, and I find this sometimes, and it's very problematic. This argument that we should get rid of all religion because all religion is bigotous and hurtful. Okay, let's unpack that. In philosophy and theology, one word to describe religion is meta-narrative. In other words, it's a narrative that's big, that's over your whole life, that's a part of who you are. And this narrative is a part of your community and your identity. It's meta-narrative. And religions are some examples of meta-narratives. Atheism and agnosticism are as well. So if what I'm hearing when people say that, that we should get rid of all religion, is right. So you don't like how these meta-narratives are behaving towards other meta-narratives, so you want to get rid of them and suppress them for your meta-narrative? So they're bigotous and hateful as their meta-narrative, so you're going to be bigotous against them and hateful and suppress them? Just saying, it's not that logical if you sit there and draw it out. So there's some things that already you could be learning about and need to be learning about to engage culture and where people are and what their meta-narratives are. So that's one thing you can learn. I do want to also mention, I have not read The God Delusion. I got like 2 pages in and was furious because he totally misquoted Rene Descartes, the guy who said, I think, therefore I am. And I thought, if you're going to lie about Descartes and there's an entire branch of academia who know him well, if you're just going to go on out there and lie, then I'm not going to bother reading you because you're lying. 2 pages in, bold-faced lying. That's a whole other conversation for another tape. So anyway, you have your testimony. you can look up ways of talking to our culture. And you need to imagine yourself with talking to people. And some of it is giving people the space and the grace to go, I'm not going to push it. I love you. I care about you, but I'm not going to push it. And we'll see. Full disclosure as well, I was a part of something called Campus Crusade for Christ as a teenager when I went into uni. And I've grown up in a fundamentalist evangelical church. That's part of my foundation, it's part of who I am. And I say that to say, I've sort of known how to share the gospel since I accepted it myself. Loads of conferences and retreats where, because it's an evangelical tradition, it's not just, do you know Christ, but are you sharing Christ? So if you get stuck talking to people, there's a couple things that I would suggest. First of all, well, a couple things that you should maybe memorize. Not so that you can recite a speech, but so that way you have the muscle memory intellectually to engage with the person. So first of all are the ABCs of salvation. Admit that you're a sinner, A. Believe that Jesus is God's son who died for you and rose again, B. And C, confess your faith in Jesus, ABC. Simple. Also, full disclosure, one of the things that I did was mission trips with the youth choir. I'm laughing now because I'm visualizing me as a teenager singing and dancing the ABC song of salvation openly in public. And I'm sure, knowing my dance moves, I did not do a good job. But also, one of the perks of that was I did have and was able to lead people to Christ based on the ABCs of salvation. And we're reading in Acts how Paul goes around and he's a tent maker. My trade, believe it or not, is balloon animals. Like when we would do these kind of carnival things and sing and proclaim the word and give an invitation time, I made balloon animals. Very basic, like I'm not Carnival Cruise level good at it. I can make a dog which can turn into a horse or a giraffe with a few adjustments and some other things. And I know how to do this in Spanish as well. And in that, I can tell you what I can make. I can ask you what you want and what colors I've got. And I would sit there doing these balloon animals and spreading the gospel. So I say all that to say, just because I know all these things, and I'm very open to converse with you about all these things, these are tools, but really it's just one tool. And I'll get to this in a second, but the main tool is relationships. So before I get on to that, there's also something called the salvation bracelet, which I encourage you to Google. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But basically you make a bracelet or a bookmark that looks like this. Maybe you've seen it before, where the different colors mean different things. Now this is just a tool. So that way, if you have it on hand and you're talking to someone about Christ, you can do that. So a lot of it though, as I said, is relational. Proclaiming Jesus is a relational thing. You're called to make disciples. I was in Campus Crusade for Christ, and I learned lots of different ways to proclaim the gospel to people. And what I ultimately wasn't comfortable with sorry, I live near a hospital. If you hear sirens, we're fine. One of the things that I became uncomfortable with is this model of evangelism where you meet a stranger and you throw at them a bunch of facts and you try to get them converted on the spot, and then maybe you take their information and you chase them up later. Which in itself isn't problematic, but it was more often than not separated from acts of love and charity. In fact, at least at the time, I don't know what Campus Crusade's doing now. I think it was an offshoot of the Billy Graham Crusades that developed. But they said at the time, we don't do missional works of charity, because that's not what we're about. We put all of our money towards spreading the gospel, not building houses and other things, which, okay, but Jesus healed people. Sometimes Jesus had to fix a physical need to get a spiritual need fixed. So anyway, I say all that to say there is a huge thing to being relational, to being kind, to being patient, to being there for the person for the long haul, and not a short haul salesman's pitch where either you buy it or you don't buy it. So that's one thing that I wanted to share with you. This past Wednesday in our Acts Bible study, we were reading about Paul and Silas and Luke going to one place trying to get in, and God saying, no, it's not ready yet. So they go, okay, and they move on to another place where they go to the Jews in the synagogues, and then they get thrown out of there, and so they go convert the Gentiles, and sometimes they're beaten and jailed, and then they just kind of brush it off, shake the dust off their sandals, as Jesus told them to do back in Matthew, and they keep going and they don't give up. And we were all really encouraged by that. And one of the things was Paul at the Areopagus talking about the unknown God. It's a story where in Acts, Paul goes to the Greeks, he sees all their gods laid out, and I'm sure it was really offensive to him as a Jew to see all this, because, yeah, the Shema. But because the Shema, part of that is, there's only one God, monotheism. So he's walking around, he goes, I see you are religious. I see you are religious. He's probably killing him what he's saying, but I see you are religious. I noticed a statue over here that says to the unknown God. Can I tell you who it is? And finding people in their context with who they are, because you're not just talking to a person that doesn't know something. You are talking to a fellow created being who God knit in their mother's womb, right? So they already have a story God is writing. And he's put you on their path to change their story, but don't throw their whole story out, and don't pretend that it's not there. You meet them where they are. And I have permission to share this story. Dave Hargett shared a lovely story about being in for a scan. And the man who was performing the scan, I think Dave was talking to him about Jesus, and the guy was just like, oh, I don't really go to church. And Dave said, well, why? He said, because I'm gay and the church doesn't like me. And Dave saw that hurt and assured him that Jesus loved him, assured him that he look around, not all churches were like that he'd be loved and accepted for who he is. That's sharing the gospel. That's great. In fact, Dave and the others, I told them I might as well just record this entire thing and have you guys do my hands-based discipleship talk for me, because this is great. It's about the person. It's about where they are and who they are. And it's about loving them. They are not a quota. And sometimes in my upbringing, this was how it was. It was, I want you to write down two names of people that you're going to go out and witness to. Write them down. And that sounds fine in the moment, but the problem was, one time in the room, one of my friends had brought an unchurched friend with her who didn't know Jesus. And that person said, I'm not a name on a page to be a project for you to work on. I'm a person. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're right. This isn't a sales conference. We are not peddling a product here. We're not like the various schemes that you might see on social media from friends that you haven't talked to in 10 years and suddenly they're contacting you trying to sell something. That's not what we're doing. We're making disciples. We're not trying to get customers. So I hope that was helpful. If not, please let me know. But I do want to say also, before we end this, once again, already long video, is that part of speaking is speaking the truth to power. Speaking out against injustice is part of the gospel. And part of being transformed to look more like Christ is not just with your words and your actions, but with your mind and your heart. And we are definitely in a season of confrontation, of confronting past social ills, which actually aren't past, they're current, they've been there the whole time. It's just every once in a while it bubbles up to the forefront of our consciousness. So quickly, I want to say why all lives matter is wrong. Now, for those of you who are people of color, who are tired of this, where it takes a toll on you to hear another white person talking about it or seeing it on social media or seeing people argue about this, feel free to cut this off here. Go in peace. I mean it, seriously. For those of you who are of my pigmentation, which to be fair, I'm practically translucent, I'm so pale, but still, confession time. I and everyone else was born in a racist system. A system that has not been cooperating across ethnicities and cultures. I have been in the predominant majority, or rather the majority of power. And as a female, I know disempowerment because I'm not a white man. But that's not to say I know the same level of disempowerment as other people. God did not make us all homogeneous blobs. He did not make us genderless, without skin colors that are different, without different personalities, without different cultures. We are not. The world is not. England is not one homogeneous mixture of people, And to say you don't see color is offensive, because that's part of who God made that person to be. And it's gorgeous. I used to agree with that mentality, and I understand where you're coming from, but God sat me down and told me if I wanted to follow him, I needed to change my mind and change my heart and listen to people who are disadvantaged in power and stop arguing with them about whether they're disadvantaged in the first place. So let me pause on the color bit and go into a gender bit, okay? Because that, I've said before, that I can talk about. The amount of times that a woman is sexually harassed or sexually assaulted and they want to talk about her past, her character, what she was wearing. Did she disclose fast enough, or did she hold it in? Who did she tell? What did she do about it? Instead of just going, that was wrong. And we are quick to try to protect the reputations of the men or women, usually statistically white men. Let's be honest. Let's seriously be honest. The vast majority of serial killers are white men. So why we're not scared of white men running around, I don't know. Just saying. But anyway, that's a track for another day. Getting back to my point. Statistically, a woman is lying about what's happened to her 10% of the time. So that means we should 90% believe her. In the same way, if a person of color is telling you, I've experienced police brutality, I've experienced someone saying the N-word at me as I'm walking by, you do not need to defend the person who did it and say, oh, well, maybe you were mistaken. They're not mistaken. In the same way, you should not be scared of a black man in a hoodie. You should not. And then when something awful happens to him, go, well, you shouldn't have been wearing a hoodie at night walking around. That's like telling a sexual assault victim, well, what were you wearing and why didn't you fight? Okay? God is on their side and God hears what they're saying. And as his body, we need to be screaming Black Lives Matter. Now, do all lives matter? Technically, yes. Do we need to focus on the black ones right now? Absolutely. Because in a couple days, what day is it? I can't even get, oh, it's Juneteenth. If you don't know what Juneteenth is, Google it, please. It's amazing. But anyway, in a couple weeks, it's going to be the 4th of July. I need to get this chair oiled. It's going to be the 4th of July. And I'm going to post things about the 4th of July. And it would be horribly offensive to me if all of a sudden someone said, all holidays matter. Okay, I didn't say they weren't. I just said happy 4th of July. It's Father's Day, either when you're watching this or it's just been Father's Day. No one needs to start shouting at fathers on Father's Day, all parents matter. Let the guy have a day. Same thing for Mother's Day. If you come for Mother's Day, there's going to be a problem. That's the problem. There are distinctions, and those distinctions are beautiful. They're nothing to be scared of, and there's certainly nothing to put barriers up. And if you don't believe me, read the book of Acts. Part of speaking rightly is speaking up for those who are being drowned out by a media who somehow makes this about Winston Churchill statues. One minority of people make it about Winston Churchill statues, therefore the whole movement is about Winston Churchill statues. In the same way, maybe 10% of women lie about rape or sexual assault, sexual harassment, therefore they all are. Really? No, it's not about cereal, and it's not about Winston Churchill. It's not about clothing, and it's not, and I'm just talking about things that I've seen on my Facebook page recently, and I've had to do some cleaning on my Facebook page and get rid of some people. It's not that no one is saying all lives don't matter. They're saying Black lives do matter, and the system is not treating them like they do. Sorry, soapbox moment. Again, I used to think this way until God, through some amazing Black friends, fellow students at my seminary, who I need to send them a gift basket, even all these years later, sat me down and said, all right, sweetie, that's not how this works. That's not how this works. And I know that was brave and courageous, and that probably took a lot out of them. In the same way it takes a lot out of a woman to have to constantly say, I'm sorry, but that guy is sexist. He just is, so I don't want to listen to him. That's exhausting. And it wouldn't surprise me if it was exhausting to them to hear my rebuttals and trying to understand and my clumsiness in it. I need to send them a gift basket. So I say all that to say, this is something that white people need to start saying to white people. Do not go to your friends of color and ask them a bunch of questions. That's not their job. They don't owe you answers or explanations. Or people who are biracial. That's not their job. They don't owe you, explanations. Google it and look at your sources. If they are donors to Trump or Putin, maybe ignore them. I'm here for chat. Now, because I love you and because I'm worried about discipleship in general, opening our minds and hearts to being transformed by Christ, I will push you. I will try to call you out on some things. But it's done in love, because we can't speak the gospel into a world that thinks we don't care about Black lives, or that we honestly think that all lives matter, in the sense of like washing out what Black Lives Matters is talking about. This went on way too long. I hope that you pause this for a WC break or whatever, got yourself another cup of tea. I hope this was helpful. If not, email me. I'm happy to have a chat. Or don't, or just Google things responsibly. There's some trash out there. Anyway, part of being a disciple is right thinking, opening yourself to have your mind changed. It's right feeling, opening yourselves to have your heart changed, even if it's scary and it hurts and it's disorienting. And part of it is right speaking and right doing, even if it costs you some friendships along the way for doing the right thing. I'll leave you with this quote. The greatest single cause of atheism today are Christians who honor Jesus with their lips, but then dishonor him with their lifestyles. That's what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable. So let's think on that one. And again, send me questions if you have it.